The night my son locked my husband and me in the basement, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't angry anymore. Angry people still see you as human. This was colder than anger. This was calculation. My husband had just collapsed trying to stop him from forcing me to sign over the house, and instead of helping, my son stood there, breathing hard, like we were obstacles standing in the way of the life he thought he deserved. Then he took my phone from the kitchen counter, slid the deadbolt shut from the outside, and said, "Maybe a few hours down there will help you think clearly." I still remember the sound of his footsteps walking away above our heads while my husband struggled to breathe beside me in the dark. And I remember the exact moment something inside me stopped breaking and started hardening instead. Because my son didn't know two things. First, the house was never legally going to become his, and second, 6 months earlier, I had accidentally discovered what Damon and his wife had been planning for us. I said nothing then. I just kept listening, kept collecting proof, kept pretending I was still the tired old woman they thought they could control. But sitting there on that basement floor, with my husband's hand shaking in mine, I finally understood something people my age learn too late. When your own child stops seeing you as family, love becomes the very thing that destroys you if you hold on to it too long. And that was the night I decided my son was going to learn exactly what it costs to treat his parents like they're already dead. My name is Miriam Walker. I'm 63 years old, and until last winter, I honestly believed my husband and I had raised a good man. Not a perfect man, just a decent one. The kind who returns phone calls, visits on holidays, and doesn't make his aging parents feel like unwanted guests in the home they spent 30 years paying for. My husband Gerald and I bought our house outside Birmingham back in 1994, when interest rates were brutal and every appliance we owned came from a discount warehouse or a yard sale. Gerald worked maintenance for the county school district. I worked at the courthouse, handling records and property files for people whose names I usually forgot by the next week. We weren't impressive people, but we were dependable. We paid bills on time, we helped neighbors during storms, we stayed married through things that break most couples now. And almost every important decision we made revolved around our son, Damon. When he wanted expensive baseball camps, Gerald worked Saturdays despite chronic back pain. When Damon got into college and pretended he could handle the costs himself, I picked up evening filing work without telling him. When Damon launched his real estate business and nearly lost everything during the first year, Gerald quietly refinanced part of his retirement savings to keep him afloat. We told ourselves that's what parents are supposed to do. Then Gerald had a stroke. Not severe enough to kill him, severe enough to change everything. Stairs became difficult. Fatigue hit him hard. His right hand trembled whenever he got stressed, and the proudest man I've ever known suddenly needed help carrying laundry baskets. That was when Damon suggested moving into the house with his wife Kelly for a little while. He framed it like concern, said they could help out, save money, be nearby if Gerald needed something. At first, it even felt comforting hearing younger footsteps in the house again. But slowly the house stopped feeling like ours. Kelly redecorated rooms without asking. Damon started talking about property value constantly. Family photographs disappeared from shelves and got replaced with gray abstract prints that looked cold enough to belong in a dentist office. Then came the comments. "This neighborhood is changing. Honestly, this land alone is worth a fortune now. You guys ever think about assisted living communities? Some of them are actually nice." Always smiling when he said it, always casual, like he was planting seeds and waiting for something ugly to grow. Then one Thursday afternoon, I came home early from the pharmacy because Gerald forgot his insurance card. I walked through the kitchen and heard voices in the dining room. Damon and Kelly didn't know I was home yet. And then I heard my son say the sentence that changed the way I would look at him forever. If we wait until after the second stroke, it'll be much easier to get control of everything.
Before I keep going, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments what country or state you're listening from, because reading those messages became one of the few things that kept me company after all this happened. And if you've ever had a gut feeling about someone you love and ignored it because the truth hurt too much, subscribe now, because I ignored mine for far too long. The strange thing about betrayal is that your body understands it before your mind does. The second I heard Damon say those words in the dining room, something cold moved through me so fast I had to grab the kitchen counter to steady myself. My first instinct was denial. Surely I misunderstood. Surely there was context I hadn't heard. But then Kelly laughed softly and said, "You really think your mother will fight it?" And Damon answered in the calmest voice imaginable, "Mom's exhausted. She'll fold eventually." I stood there frozen beside a bag of pharmacy medication while my own son discussed our future like a business negotiation. I should have walked into that room immediately. I should have confronted him. But fear does strange things to people. Instead, I backed quietly out the front door, sat in my car with the engine off, and stared through the windshield for almost 20 minutes, trying to slow my breathing. That night I told Gerald everything. I expected anger. Instead, he looked tired, deeply tired, like some part of him had already suspected it. He sat silently in his recliner for a long time before finally saying, "I think we stayed useful to him longer than most parents do." That sentence broke something in me worse than the betrayal itself. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Damon intercepting mail, Kelly asking detailed questions about our insurance policies, documents disappearing from drawers and then mysteriously reappearing days later. One afternoon, I found Damon taking photographs of property paperwork in my home office. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled and said he was helping organize things. From that moment on, I stopped trusting anything inside my own house. Quietly, without telling Damon or Kelly, I began making copies of everything: bank statements, property records, retirement accounts. I opened a small storage box at my old credit union across town and started placing copies there little by little. I even spoke privately with an attorney named Rachel Mercer after pretending I had a dental appointment. Rachel listened carefully while I explained the situation and then asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Walker, has your son asked you to sign anything recently?" I told her yes. Damon had pushed several estate planning documents at us over the last 6 months, always acting irritated whenever I said I wanted time to read them first. Rachel's expression changed immediately. She told me never to sign anything without her reviewing it first. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Elder financial abuse usually begins long before the victim realizes they're in danger." I wish I could say things improved after that. They didn't. The tension inside the house became unbearable. Damon grew impatient. Kelly stopped pretending to like us at all. Then came the night Gerald overheard them fighting upstairs. I still remember every word because it was the first time I realized how far this was really going to go. Kelly shouted, "If they won't leave willingly, then make them." And my son answered, "I'm trying."
Real families aren't supposed to fall apart like this, which is why I read every comment people leave on these videos. Because sometimes hearing someone say, "I went through this too," matters more than you realize. So before we keep going, tell me where you're watching from, and if this story has you holding your breath already, subscribe now, because what happened that next weekend still wakes me up at night. After the argument upstairs, everything inside the house changed, not loudly at first, quietly, like the air itself had turned hostile. Damon stopped pretending we were family and started treating us like a problem waiting to be solved. He became impatient whenever Gerald moved too slowly. Kelly complained constantly about medical equipment in the living room. One morning, I overheard her telling a friend on speakerphone, "I swear, it already feels like we're running a nursing home." Gerald heard it too. I saw it in his face, even though he pretended not to. The humiliation hurt him more than the stroke ever had. A few days later, Damon placed a folder on the kitchen table and told us we needed to start thinking realistically. Inside were brochures for senior living facilities nearly 40 miles away, cheap ones, the kind with online reviews describing neglect and understaffing. Gerald pushed the folder away immediately. Damon's jaw tightened. "Dad, you can barely manage stairs anymore." Gerald looked him directly in the eye and said slowly and carefully, because speaking still exhausted him sometimes, "This is my house." Damon snapped after that. Not screaming, worse. Calm, controlled, dangerous. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Legally, that's actually becoming complicated." I felt my entire body go cold. He thought he already had leverage somehow. That night, I barely slept. Around midnight, I got up for water and noticed light under Damon's office door upstairs. As I passed by, I heard my own name followed by the words conservatorship and medical incapacity. I stopped breathing. Kelly asked, "Do you really think a judge would sign off on it?" Damon answered, "If Gerald has another medical episode and Mom looks unstable enough, yeah." I walked back downstairs feeling physically sick. The next morning, I called attorney Rachel Mercer from the grocery store parking lot. She listened carefully and then told me to come to her office immediately. What she explained there terrified me. Damon had apparently been making quiet inquiries about guardianship laws for months. Rachel said if someone successfully convinced the court elderly parents could no longer manage finances independently, control over assets could shift fast, especially if medical events escalated suddenly. I remember gripping the arms of my chair so hard my fingers cramped, because suddenly every strange conversation, every document request, every manipulative comment made horrifying sense. Damon wasn't waiting for us to die naturally anymore. He was trying to legally erase us while we were still alive. When I got home that afternoon, Gerald was standing in the kitchen arguing with Damon for the first time in months. Really arguing. His hands were shaking badly. Damon shoved paperwork toward him and demanded it immediately. Gerald knocked the papers onto the floor. Kelly yelled something from the hallway. And then, in one awful instant, Damon grabbed Gerald hard enough to make him stumble backward into the counter. I screamed. Gerald collapsed sideways against the cabinets, clutching his chest. And instead of helping his father, my son looked at me and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "You both are making this so much harder than it needs to be." I never expected thousands of strangers to care about this story, but reading your comments reminded me how many people carry family pain quietly for years. So before I finish this, tell me where you're watching from and whether you think blood really makes someone family anymore. And if you've stayed with me this far, subscribe now, because this was the day my son finally understood what he had done. The moment Gerald hit the kitchen floor, something inside me shut off completely. Not emotionally, practically. The panic disappeared and survival took over. While Damon stood there frozen and Kelly kept shouting that none of this would have happened if we had just cooperated, I grabbed my phone from my purse and called 911 myself. Gerald was conscious but struggling to breathe, his face gray and drenched in sweat. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and I will never forget the expression on one young medic's face when Gerald quietly admitted he had been shoved during an argument with his son. Damon immediately started talking over him, trying to explain, trying to soften it, trying to turn violence into misunderstanding, but the damage was already done. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived before the ambulance even left the driveway. One of them separated me from Damon and asked a question no parent ever imagines hearing. "Ma'am, do you feel safe staying in this house tonight?" I looked past him at my son standing on the porch and realized I no longer knew the answer. Gerald spent 2 nights in the hospital for observation. Stress had triggered a dangerous cardiac episode on top of everything else already happening with his health. During those 2 days, attorney Rachel Mercer moved faster than I thought possible, because unlike Damon, I had documentation, copies of every suspicious form he pushed at us, emails Kelly sent discussing transitioning ownership, recordings from my phone of conversations about conservatorship, even photographs Rachel instructed me to take of financial documents Damon had secretly altered. The worst part wasn't that my son wanted the house, it was how organized he had become about taking it. Rachel filed emergency protective paperwork the morning Gerald was discharged. Damon and Kelly were legally ordered to leave the property temporarily pending investigation into elder abuse and attempted financial coercion. Watching deputies supervise them while they packed their things felt unreal, like I was watching another family collapse from far away. Kelly cried angrily the entire time. Damon barely spoke. But right before leaving, he looked at me with genuine shock and asked, "You recorded us?" And that was the moment I understood something heartbreaking. My son truly believed his betrayal mattered less than my response to it. Gerald came home quieter after that, smaller somehow. One evening, about a month later, we sat together on the back porch watching rain move across the yard when he finally said, "I keep wondering where we lost him." I didn't answer because I wondered the same thing every day. 6 months later, Damon accepted a plea deal connected to fraud charges tied to forged financial documents Rachel uncovered during the investigation. No prison time, probation, financial penalties, mandatory counseling. People always expect revenge stories to feel victorious at the end. They don't tell you the truth. There is no victory when your child becomes someone you barely recognize. There's only grief mixed with relief. Gerald passed away peacefully the following spring with my hand in his. The house stayed exactly where he wanted it, quiet, stubborn, full of memories. Damon still texts occasionally, mostly on holidays, mostly short messages that sound like someone standing outside a locked door they no longer know how to open. I answer sometimes I don't. But one thing I know for certain is this: growing old teaches you that love without boundaries eventually becomes permission for people to destroy you. And if there's one lesson this entire nightmare carved in me, it's that protecting yourself from your own family does not make you cruel. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you alive.